Welcome, everybody, and welcome everybody out there in the World Wide Web. Yeah, we've been live streamed, ladies and gentlemen, because we're discussing this imminent question here today. What is jazz today? It's a question that was posed, I heard from a New York producer just a while ago, ever since jazz has been made or has been a word or a music. It used to be much simpler to answer that question. In 1957, this is jazz. Very easy. You just take a record and actually it was volume 1, so I'm kind of cheating here a little bit. But you had ragtime, blues, New Orleans, Chicago, New York, Dixieland. 3 swing tracks. Progressive jazz, which was actually a Pete Rugolo track. New Orleans revival and modern jazz. So, yeah.
Who are
The players, it's the Maple Leaf Rag by Wally Rose. Bessie Smith, put it right here. Louis Armstrong does Jazz Lips. Eddie Condon, Home Cooking. Big Spiderback, Sentimental Baby. Phil Napoleon, Copenhagen. Duke Ellington has Merry-Go-Round, that's Swing. I'll Never Be the Same, Teddy Wilson and Billie Holiday. A nice jam session by Benny Goodman. Swing. Progressive jazz, 4:20 a.m., Pete Rugolo. And the New Orleans revival is Turk Murphy, Goddamn Blues. Not goddamn, but Goddamn Blues. Modern jazz is Makin' Time by Dave Brubeck. So that's as far as we got in 1957. We could go into details here, but we won't, because we have the mentors of the Jazz Academy to maybe wrap our heads around this great questions. Clarice Assad is all the way over to the left, and I think she deserves a round of applause. Yeah. Born in Rio de Janeiro, she lives in the States or has been living there for decades, believe it or not. By her side is Sullivan Fortner from New Orleans, a great piano player. Over here we have Martin Wind from the wonderful city of Flensburg. Yeah. Who's also actually a New York resident for decades now. And the reason I looked over at this lady when I said Benny Goodman, because it's clarinetist Anat Cohen, right over there. On saxophone, Donnie McCaslin. And Matt Wilson here on the drummer. Yes, indeed. Now, I heard that you already discussed this question yesterday. So basically, you were already cheating, talking about, what should we say? Is there a right answer or not? I'm totally fine with there not being a right answer. We're just trying to find out, the different possibilities, because like I said, in 57, it was easy. Maybe during the 60s, it was still easy. But apparently, it's not that simple today to find an answer, or else there wouldn't be so many people here. The same producer I mentioned before, when I told him the theme of this talk, said, good luck with that. Yeah. But I think we should try our luck with this. And maybe we'll approach this from another end. You all know there's a John Coltrane, Eric Dolphy concert at the Gate from '61, re-released. They found it. And with it, they found a review in Downbeat magazine from that time, which was a scathing review of that concert, where the reviewer wrote, that basically they're taking all the swing out of jazz and creating basically an anti-jazz. So maybe we could approach it from that side. What isn't jazz?
Yeah, we're both.
Is it that bad?
That's difficult. But I think a couple things that come to mind for me around this is it's more brushstrokes. Like one thing that I think about, what is jazz? To me, it's interaction, it's community, and it's something that can really have a lot of spontaneity in it, and through that interaction and through that communication, these moments, these surprising moments can happen that don't often happen in other genres of music. So that just comes to mind as we think about this, and it comes to mind to me whether it's, irregardless of if it's a swing groove or if it's like straight eighth or if it's free or if it's like electro, if you're coming at it from a perspective of an improviser, speaking the improviser's language, which is open to dialogue and open to, open to dialogue and has a spirit of courage, and a spirit of vulnerability, and everybody is communicating, or what's the word? Everybody's participating in that feeling. That to me is something that is jazz. That sounds like jazz music to me, and it's transcendent of the, of groove sometimes. It's that spirit, and I don't get that in other types of music often. So I'll start with that.
Great. Yeah. Thank you very much for.
Have a good evening.
Now, Matt, when we spoke for the 5 minutes that we had backstage, immediately we were going down this, the history lane. You mentioned all those great drummers that inspired you, and that you listened to, when you were a kid, and you counted off the times you saw Buddy Rich. It's like all those, like how Philly Joe did that. But how important, and of course I'm being devil's advocate here, is jazz history to what is going on in jazz today?
There's a cat. His name was Billy Shakespeare. You might have heard of him. He's a poet and a writer. And he said, "What is?"
Billy Shakespeare.
Yeah, I refer to him. We're on a first name basis. He said there was a quote of his: "Is what is past is prologue." So I think there's a continuum, and I think we want to keep that continuum of that spirit to get within the music. And I agree with Donnie. I think one of the words that I was thinking of, and he said it was vulnerability. The other one I like is human moments. I like people. I think we all want to share human moments, and I think jazz is a vulnerable art form in that you're putting yourself out there in a way that's slightly different. Though we heard the orchestra rehearse today, and they're doing it through what they're hearing and what they're playing also. But I like this aspect lately too of people. I think people are. I read this once that there's a hormone let off that humans give off when they know something is being created before them. It might be a interview question that goes wrong, or in sports, they know that, wow, something's going down. It's not set. Like when you see a talk show and like this one, and it goes awry a little bit, and you see the people how they have to react. And I think people are, and I think that's one of the things that people, they may not even know that they're feeling that. My parents were cool. They took me to everything. I grew up in the cornfields of Illinois, and I was lucky. I had a buddy. We went to see all these people. Within 1 week one time I saw Clark Terry and Dizzy Gillespie and Oscar Peterson. And I was like, this is a town of 2,000 people. We practiced and watched the corn grow. But my parents loved to go and watch how the performers were and talk to them. And I have a picture of my dad with Joe Pass at a festival and all this stuff. So I think they like the spirit of the people, and I think there's some people that feeds their soul, or they hear that in the music, and some people some people are never going to understand that. But I think when you have performers that open up their hearts and really offer that, like these folks up here and the young folks that we heard today, already after the first day, we know that we have to keep that spirit of human moments alive amongst everything else, internet, AI, whatever, all the stuff that's bombarding us. But those human moments that we can share with music that is so like courageous, like Donnie said, or vulnerable, I think that's one of the things. And also to be felt and heard. I think when you notice when a group is up there and everybody's being felt and heard, I think it's a really beautiful experience. So I think it's in great hands, and I'm an optimist, so I'm always like trying to figure out what I can do to scheme to figure out more things to do all the time. But I think we have to keep doing that too. We can't sit around and complain. We go out and do something about it. It helps a lot. So like somebody like yourself who's helped the music so much, we appreciate that.
You just said that, there's some people who will never get it and some will. But isn't that the best moment when somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I don't really like jazz, and you play them something and they're like, oh, I like that. That's cool.
Yeah. That happens like at the Green Mill in Chicago all the time because people just love going to that place. So people come, wow, I didn't know this was jazz. So sometimes they get what is in print or something about what the music is, and when they go and experience, they're like, yeah, it's cool. So. Tip.
Now, you took us back to the fields of Illinois, and we have sort of like the wonderful worldwide world of jazz here, from Flensburg, Tel Aviv, Rio de Janeiro, New Orleans. Anat, how was it for you in Tel Aviv? How did you get the jazz bug? Breathe deep.
I was lucky because, I think the jazz bug transfers to all of us from passionate individuals. And somebody's like, either they say, here, check this out. And mostly if they are your teachers or your mentors or you see them and they love what they do. So this music, like any other thing, if somebody's passionate about something, it transfers very, very beautifully. So I think I was lucky that in Tel Aviv there was, when I grew up, there was one little club, and there was a generation, the older generation, I guess, at this point, that were playing jazz, and I was also lucky that I had two brothers. I still have two brothers that fell in love with jazz and before me. Because I was playing classical clarinet when they were getting into jazz. But I saw them playing, actually, and I thought that, there was something that seemed so human about this music. Beside the feel of swing, which was the first jazz I played, was the music of New Orleans, but there was something when I watched my brothers playing in a big band, and of course, as a clarinetist, I could not fit in a big band until I had to grab a saxophone. But when I watched that's something that, music that takes so much demand to learn an instrument, to understand, to read music, so many skills, yet people just sitting in a section and they comment to each other and and people get up and solo and I was like, I wanted to do that. I just wanted to be part of this, something that, and sometimes this music seems to be so loose, and yet it takes such a huge amount of skills to be able to make it look so easy. And the amount of things that jazz musicians has to think about, in addition to, I'm not comparing, music, but that in addition to the instrumental skills and the theoretical knowledge and the creative part and the communication part, it's a never-ending skill that little did I know when I watched. It just seems like fun. So I had good mentors in Tel Aviv, and years later it became Tel Aviv is a source, is producing jazz musicians like crazy. Actually, so many young musicians coming out of there and they're making a great name for them. So the mentors did well.
Apparently.
So, yeah.
Now, Mr. Fortner, you've been doing a lot of head shaking while during this answer. Especially, you mentioned playing the music of New Orleans at the very beginning, and I read somewhere about you that it wasn't until you met Barry Harris that something shifted in your playing. He's also mentioned as a mentor on your website. What happened?
With Barry?
Yeah.
In particular?
Yeah, indeed.
I had just graduated Manhattan School of Music, master's degrees, about a year or so after I graduated. And while I was in Manhattan School, I started touring with Stefan Harris and Roy Hargrove. And I remember one night I was playing the Vanguard, and it was a friend of mine who was also a mentor, a pianist named Rodney Kendrick. Sure. He came to me after one of the sets, and he said, "Have you gone to see Barry Harris?" And I said, "No." And he said, "You better take your black ass over to go see Barry Harris." Like, straight up, just like that. Very subtle. But the way he said it was almost like that was like an emergency. And so I was like, okay. And after like 2 or 3 times of him saying the exact same thing, I said, okay, let me go ahead to the 65th Street Y. Because Barry used to have his class on 56th Street between, was it Amsterdam and West End or whatever? So I would go there, and I would play, and Barry would say nothing. It's like, okay. And I would go back, and Barry would say nothing. And then finally, I called Rodney. I was like, it's not working. Barry doesn't like me. He said, go in and play something from Bud Powell. Transcribe anything from Bud Powell and play that for him. And so I did, and he looked at me. He was like, huh, okay. And then he said, come back next week.
Now, what did you play before?
I was just playing, stuff I would normally play. He would call a standard or whatever. I would comp behind singers, and I would just accompany singers. He wasn't really paying much attention to me. But after class was over, I snuck in like Bud Powell's intro of My Heart So Still. And he's like, wow, okay, great. You heard that, huh? Good. Come back next week. And I would do this all the time. And then finally one day, I was playing something, and he was like, and you better play it good. And I was like, okay. So I'm shaking. He's sitting there looking at me while I'm playing. He was like, nope. We got a lot of stuff in there that you need to get rid of. And I was like, but I'm a graduate of Manhattan School of Music, and I have my master's degree. I graduated top of my class and all of that stuff. And he said, leave all of that at the door. That means absolutely nothing in here. And then I started thinking about it. I was like, this man actually lived with Thelonious Monk for 10 years. You know what I mean? He studied with Bud Powell. If anybody has a right to say anything like that, it's him. So I had to check my ego. I had to leave my degree and all of that stuff at the door, and then pretty soon I threw it all away. I was willing to throw it all away at his feet. And I feel like that was a moment, that was a real humbling moment for me. It was a very challenging moment for me. But I found that the information that he gave just created a certain type of awareness. Suddenly Charlie Parker clicked. Suddenly Thelonious Monk clicked. I had always heard them. I had heard them in school, and since high school I had heard this music, but it was the first time I actually heard them and just was like, wow, this is the greatest music ever. You know what I mean? That's what Barry did for me.
Wow. Now, you mentioned Roy Hargrove and Kendrick, and that was a time when, or maybe that was before your time, when they were sort of these new hip-hop listening kids in the jazz world, which was a big discussion back then for some of the elders or some of the not-so-elders, where this influence came in, where we're sitting here, we're obviously looking at this in retrospect, and we can like, oh, but that was a natural thing to happen. You know, influences come in the music, but you remember that as, or I remember that as something, you know, where there was a lot of opposition. Well, I was, you know, posing this devilish question of what isn't jazz, and at that point, some of the people would definitely have said, like, that has nothing to do with jazz, doesn't have a room in here. Here we are, 2023, and yeah, it does sort of have room there. We you know, this is we just celebrated 50 years of hip hop.
I mean, and look at the evolution of it. Yeah. It's changed over time. You know, through the advent of technology. I mean, when jazz was first starting, the new invention was the saxophone and the drum set. You know what I'm saying? And you can pretty much trace the evolution of the genre based on how they use these instruments. And then keyboards came along, and then computer came along, and you know, so and then because of the computer and because of all of these electronic waves that's happening around the world, now you're getting a bunch of influences. You're getting a bunch of different countries having their little say and putting their little spin on these songs that we've grown up and listened to for hundreds of years, and creating new songs from blending of genres, which was also what jazz was. Jazz was a blending of
what it always was. Right?
Always was. I mean, classical music, klezmer music, blues, you know,
Cuban music,
it's
just everything.
All of it. The jazz is to me like this big pot of gumbo. I'm from New Orleans, so bear with me. Yeah, you know, and it's gumbo, and gumbo is pretty much everything. Any and everything that you can think of. Just put it all in there and let it boil and see what happens. You know what I mean? Yeah.
But it's usually very tasty end result. So
well, if somebody does it right. I mean, you don't put anything you want. There's a certain type of formula that just like the music, there's a certain formula. There's certain key ingredients that have to be there. Like if you can't have gumbo without roux, you know what I'm saying? If you decide to
maybe you have to explain to non-New Orleans people what roux is.
Okay, roux is just oil and flour. That's the basis of it. It's just oil and flour with an even combination. You just stir it around and it turns brown, and that's the basis of pretty much gumbo, of other types of New Orleans of soups that have been passed down in that region in Louisiana or Mississippi or whatever. They call it roux, the basis. Or bechamel is another version of it. You know, it's like the basis of it.
Now, you in your big old gumbo mix, you also mentioned classical music, and if one Googles Clarice Assad, one finds these two worlds that you're definitely, you know, a highly regarded composer of modern classical music. That's what I read. Don't be shy. And you're a singer, piano player. You do all these things, and you come from Rio de Janeiro, which we associate with a different kind of
So the
music.
question is, what am I doing here?
No. The question is, how do you balance these two worlds, and how does maybe one influence the other?
Yeah, I was just joking. Oh well.
Thank you.
Yeah, no. It's I asked myself this question when Anat invited me, and at first I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do there? And I thought, okay, you have some right to be there, because I don't feel like I'm a jazz musician, but I'm a musician who loves and respects jazz so much. And I have, I think, a good pair of ears, for what, like energy, like that the music brings and the emotion of it, especially when it's played with your heart. But I come from Brazil, you're right. And Brazilian music is very known for choro and bossa nova. If you Google it, okay. And it's the kind of music that almost became part of the jazz repertoire in a sense, that America's embraced it more than Brazilians. So you hear bossa nova more in America than in Brazil, that's for sure. It's like almost dead in Brazil. Isn't that funny? But I love that tradition, and I think if I put myself in this panel, if anything, I guess the continuation of that language as far as jazz is concerned. That's my contribution. Take that music and don't let it die and continue with it, you know? And then I grew up listening and composing. That's what I first did when I was 6 years old with my father. My father's a classical guitarist, so I heard a lot of guitar and plucking and stuff like that. And my biggest dream was to write for orchestra. So I'm doing a lot of that now, and I'm trying to bridge these worlds together to get the orchestra people to improvise somehow, to leave room for that. So this is my understanding of what jazz can be. Be creative, improvise. Don't play everything that's on the page only. Have a say in what you want to do, because classical music is really on the other spectrum of it. So this is I guess what I'm trying to do with all of these genres.
You mentioned bossa nova, which is also sort of an amalgamation. I mean, if it hadn't been for Henri Salvador and maybe Kenny Dorham coming to play and Sergio Mendes and them hearing that, combining it into their own thing with the samba, it wouldn't have been born. So it's very, you know, it's a great thing that it's then made its way back to the States and into jazz. And I think that's the beautiful thing. We said what Donnie said at the very beginning. Now we're asking the question, what is jazz today? It has been true for a long, long time. This participation, interaction, and the human factor.
Yes. I'm just kidding. No, I mean, I agree, and just thinking about everything we're talking about, like Sullivan was saying, you know, the idea of it being a gumbo, and that resonates with me because it's, you know, we're all trying to tell our personal story and express ourselves in a different way than a singer-songwriter would, right? It's not through words per se, although of course vocalists do that, but you know, we're trying to tell our story through the music, and it's really, you know, the history of the music is part of that gumbo, or part of the soup is a big part of it, you know, and then we're trying to, but we have access to all these things now, you know, that we can just pick and choose and put in, and it's just an overwhelming amount of choice. But ultimately, what the journey for each of us is to make a very compelling gumbo to tell our story. I'm going to slightly pivot to, because you know, what is jazz today, right? And I was thinking about it, you know, and one thing I've tried to do is to listen a lot to like iTunes. What are the, you know, you know, they have the top like new singles out or whatever. So I've been doing that the last couple years, and it's interesting, you know. I mean, one thing that I notice is that there's a lot of electric music and a lot of stuff that is almost like smooth jazz, but it's like disguised, or not disguised is probably the wrong word, because I don't mean that artists are disguising it, but some stuff to me, you know, it doesn't sound like the smooth jazz that I think of when I think of that term, but as I listen to the elements and I'm like, okay, and this is just a brushstroke, I'm not, you know, hoping not, this doesn't sound judgmental, but it's like, okay, it's a static kind of groove, limited kind of language, and, you know, there's this and that, and it just, you know, it doesn't really move me that much, and it's like, it feels like smooth jazz to me, but just in a different packaging, you know? So I know that's a critical thing to say, but I'm just being honest up here. And so there's that, but I mean, there's also a lot of great, really creative things happening, but when I'm looking at the most popular, right, that's a lot of what I see. And of course, within there's genius, you know, Lewis Cole, who's like a total genius, and he's just so killing. Jacob Collier, you know, there's a lot of stuff in there that's electric and that's really killing, but then there's a lot of other stuff where I'm like, wow, that feels like light. It feels light to me. Mm-hmm. Where's the depth? I don't hear a Love Supreme, you know, and I don't hear, you know, hear the Far East Suite, or, you know. Anyway, that's just me, and I'm just a reflection on what is jazz today. That's one thing, and I mean, I don't want to go on and on about it, but it could be a reflection of where we are in this age of like our attention spans are short because there's, you know, TikTok and this and that, and, you know, I think all of us really have done really deep listening. I know you have, and I can speak for all of us, where you sit there with one track and you're like, what is happening here? How do you, and so me now being a little older and all, on the mentor educator side, and there's that dynamic of kids, as you can imagine, like, yes, I've got every Miles Davis record imaginable, but have you really, really absorbed the deeper lesson in there? And that's hard. That takes a lot of patience and commitment. And so when I'm hearing some of these tracks, I don't hear that patience and commitment.
Yeah.
I mean, but of course, I'm just being general, and I'm not talking about, there's so much great music out there, like Matt, I share Matt's enthusiasm. When has there ever been as many talented people in this creative art form as there is right now, numbers-wise, across the world? I don't know if there ever has been. It's incredible.
Well, also because it's spread around the world. I
Yeah.
mean, when we were talking about, the very beginnings, it was an exotic thing in Paris. It was interesting to have on a tour, State Department tour of South Africa, but it wasn't, these scenes grew out of that. But it took a lot of time for them to grow. Actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was going to throw in there's a very popular playlist on this other DSP, digital store, that's called State of Jazz. State of Jazz this week, as of last Friday, has John Nathan Blake as the #1 track. I think we can all, we're all shaking heads, going like, yep, this is jazz.
And that's such a great cover to that record, man. So beautiful.
It's showing him and his father, John Blake, who is a really great sort of jazz fusion violin player, amazing musician, wonderful. But if you go down the list, you'll find exactly that. There's a sort of something that samples, a couple of bars, and there's some sort of Fender Rhodes on top of it, and that's it. But it's like #5 in the State of Jazz playlist, and it's got, millions of plays. It's, it has 1 million monthly listeners, that playlist. So if someone is interested in the music and has a subscription to that, they go to this playlist and go like, oh, that's jazz. That's Roisin Murphy with who's a singer from a British pop group who loves jazz. She's great, but there's very little jazz in there. So maybe we have a starting point there.
But I have a question, and you guys can answer. When somebody is putting out a record and the record label need to define what it is and load it into the digital platforms, then you call it jazz or you call it whatever you want. It goes in the genre, right? It depends. I don't know even who makes those decisions and what the music,
Well, in all honesty, if you have a pop record and then you want it to be in the jazz world, you're limiting yourself.
On the contrary, you might do very well. Maybe you're going to do much better if you call it jazz, and then it's going to be successful.
To tell you the truth, I had just that happen last week when someone, I also work for a distribution company, and someone from another department sent me this track. It's like the label wants to, label this jazz. You're the expert. Tell me, is it jazz? I didn't respond in time, but like half an hour later, he goes like, you know what? Nah, we labeled it lo-fi hip hop. That's fine. It's out there already. We released it. So there is sort of a quality control. But you're right, of course. That's why that happens. Martin, you also were shaking your head, and I'm sure we haven't heard lots from you. You grew up in Flensburg. You were one of the original members of the Bujazzo. It was a very different time back then, getting into jazz. What were your influences? What were you think that made you passionate about this music?
Well, you mentioned I grew up in Flensburg, which of course is the jazz center of the world.
Indeed, yeah.
So, it's just it proves that, and Matt and I have, because he's from the cornfields of Illinois. So first of all, it doesn't matter where you're from. I have to say that even you're from New Orleans, the birthplace of this music. But I was introduced to this music by my high school teacher, who unfortunately just passed away. But he invited me to join the big band. I played electric bass with 15. I picked up the upright bass when I was 17. I was very fortunate that we had a pretty good orchestra at the high school too. So from really the time that I picked up the upright bass, it was just all music to me. There were no categories. That it was music either moved me or it didn't move me, and that was really the only criteria that I had, and that made me look for those things that moved me. And I think that, like all of us, they're just stepping, like me getting into the Viazzo obviously was a huge step. And everybody in that orchestra was in Cologne. So I went to Cologne because that, before the wall came down, that was really the place to be in Germany as a young jazz musician. Studied, I dig that. Yeah, and after the wall came down, not everybody, but a lot of people moved to Berlin. And
it was also because Peter Herbolzheimer was there.
He lived there.
Leading the Viazzo.
Absolutely. But there was also an incredible classical bassist. His name was Wolfgang Güttler, who I think actually had played in Hamburg for a time before he played with Berlin and Karajan for 10 years. And then he came to, that's a whole different story. So I came to Cologne thinking, you know what, I'm going to study with this incredible teacher who was extremely open-minded, by the way. He had no interest in producing as many successful orchestra bassists as possible, but he wanted us to become independently thinking artists. Not, bass players, but artists, like the whole thing. And so I did this for 6 years, and I thought, well, during that time, I'm sure I'll find out whether I want to be an orchestra musician or I want to become a jazz musician. And after those 6 years, it wasn't even close, even though I had incredible experiences playing classical music. But I wanted to improvise. I wanted to be part of a rhythm section. I was infected by, and that was really one of the main reasons why I ended up in the United States. I love playing music that swings. It's just something that feel to me, that's jazz for me. That feeling, it's unique. You don't find it anywhere else. Yes, there are the beats, there are the rhythms that feel great, but man, when something swings, right? Nothing, no. And I also felt that, because by the time I was in Cologne, I started working with Americans that were coming over from the States. I was touring a little bit. James Morrison's band, I remember, 4 weeks all over Europe, was fantastic. But I always felt that when I was around musicians from New York, United States, that my level of playing always went up. And I didn't want that just a few weeks out of the year. I wanted to be around that all the time. And that's really what made me move to New York in '96.
It's funny that you mentioned swing, because there was a time not too long ago when you had the feeling that if something only just began to swing, somebody was like, jazz police would come in and go like, oh, just don't go to.
Yeah, the notion that music that swings can be modern. Right. Well, I can give you many different examples of, like Jim McNeely's music, just to mention one. It's as modern and as fresh as it gets, and it can swing. Absolutely.
Now, as we have this topic today, I wanted to ask you what you're listening to right now. Is there anything that really grabs your interest? And don't go like, I'm listening to a lot, and I'm listening to Donnie's new music, but is there anything you discovered recently that sort of really...
I was just going to say that I find myself listening to a lot of the things that I've been listening to for the last 30 years. I go back to, Miles at Town Hall. I go back to Mahler's Second Symphony. I go back to a lot of that. I have to admit I am not aware of what is going on the scene like maybe some of my colleagues, checking out who's being played on iTunes and all that. So I'm here to learn. Anybody heard
have an
anything really
opinion.
exciting?
I am listening to something so exciting. Oh my God! Oh yeah! Okay, she is amazing. She's from India. Her name is Varijasri Venugopal.
Please, can you?
Oh yes.
So that we can
Call her Vari, and she'll be happy with you know her. You know her. Well, she is amazing, and she's from India, so she has the background of South Carnatic music. She grew up, she's got to be in her early 30s now, so she grew up in the age of the rise of the internet, and she was able to get access to this music that otherwise, namely jazz, and she heard it, she got obsessed with it, and then later, many years later, she posted a video of herself scat singing Carnatic style to giant steps on top of the solo, and you hear every note. And then I heard that, and I almost fainted, and I called her, I gotta meet you. And then now I'm getting her to go to Brazil again. I know, curating a program so that she can be in it, because people need to hear this girl. She's phenomenal. She's mixing. This is like the fusion we're talking about. I would say the future of jazz, I guess, because now this Indian musician is taking it and giving her own spin, and I really invite everyone to check it out.
And she scats with the syllables of the
That's right.
Really the Carnatic syllables, so it's so beautiful. So
Yes.
she sings the solos. It's mind blowing because she gets every note and all the.
It's amazing. Oh, and then she'll give more than it's there because she can do the microtonal stuff.
And she
You're
transcribes,
gonna
and most
love
of her posts, by the way, she just sits in the car and she sings. You see, she's with the phone singing to the radio, the car radio. It's pretty awesome.
So Donnie, in your deep research on iTunes and Apple Music, is there anything you found that?
Okay, I mean, full disclosure is the last few years. I mean, so I've been doing that, like I described, but I listen to a lot of non-jazz music. I listen a lot to just a few things. I was just looking at my phone just to see what is on my playlist, and so I listened to this band called The Smile a lot, and I was recently really into the single by Tavlo. It's like, I don't even know how to describe it. I listened a lot to Rage Against the Machine, and because I was just on the road with Elvis Costello, I was listening to a lot of his music to try to prepare, for the tour, and I listened to things like Meshuggah, and just a lot of things, because but I'm going to get back. I'm coming. I'm circling back to you. I'm circling back because the music that I play with my band, the main band that I tour with, is really electric music, and it's like progressive, and it's like a hybrid. And so for me to feed my creative unconscious as a songwriter, I'm looking for things that are going to spark a sense of imagination with all those elements in play. So that's one thing. But I love Branford Marsalis, for example, and his record, I can't remember the title, but that's one for me that was really inspiring. And it's a couple of years old or something, and it's the band he's had for many years, with Eric and Justin and Joey, and he's just killing, and it's acoustic music, and it's really swinging. And the groove, it's so deep. And so that's one thing that is more contemporary that I think is very compelling. And then to harken back to what Martin was saying, for me, Sonny Rollins, especially because I'm reading his book, and I think we've been talking about it. It's an incredible book, the biography. You've probably already read it 10 times. But in the spirit of of that, going back and listening to some of his stuff, for me is very very affirming. You know, I think he considered. Well, I'm kind of going off on a tangent. Let me just roll it back. But but you know, sometimes, you know, he's just such a. I think he refers to himself as a real blue collar improviser. You know, where it's
a blue collar.
And I think that was from a Downbeat interview. Don't quote me on it, but that really resonated with me because being in music school, you know, it's just like so much emphasis on this harmony and this chord over this chord over this chord over this chord over this chord. And you're like, whoa. And so long story short, there's something that's just so earthy and organic about his playing. So that's something that I go back to. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting off topic. And yeah, maybe I'll just stop right there. Sorry, guys. I tend to roll, but anyway, Matt
but something you brought up earlier, and I think it's true of all of us in this room. We all have a story. You have a story. You have a story. You can't let anybody take your story away, right? And the story, your story in music is what you've gathered. You know, so you know, I grew up hearing different kinds of things. You know, I heard swing through Roger Miller, King of the Road. That's why I love the two feel. Trailers for sale. It's swung. You know, so I heard swing through that. That's why TV show themes. You know, the Odd Couple thing. You know, all these things are part of our story. So you know, we all are from different places, but we all gather because we have this central story that we want to be a part of. So that's why, for me, I do a lot of different kinds of ways of listening and hearing the music. I do some really designated, but you know what I love? The radio. I mean, so I don't have to choose. And I love hearing something. I sometimes have to pull over. And like I just heard this Blossom Dearie record where she sings Comden and Green, and she sings The Party's Over.
Yeah.
Man, if you can't, if I don't know how, if you'd have to be, you have to check your pulse if this doesn't get to you. It's Ray Brown, Kenny Burrell, Ed Thigpen, and Blossom. And she's like, when Kenny Burrell blows out front, and then she comes, the party's over. Oh, it's like so great. And then, you know, and then I might, and then something of Cannonballs I'll hear on the radio, or on Sirius XM I'll hear, you know, Johnny Cash. You know, I love country music a lot. I mean, it's kind of part of my roots, so I love that. And I think, you know, I think if we had the same discussion with modern country people, there'd be some people that'll go like, well, you know, it's George Jones and Johnny. I mean, there's some people that are so into the roots of the stuff. Yeah. So I mean, you know, I think we all want to keep gathering, and now we have so much to choose from, like what you're talking about. Pop music, you know, I mean, because I have 4 kids, they're in their 20s, but you know, I learned so much, and I covered a Beyonce tune on one of my records, and when I wanted to cover Dance Till the World Ends by Britney Spears, I kind of got kiboshed by the boys. I have triplet sons. They're like, Dad, don't, please don't. That's when they were younger. Now they would be cool about it. But I mean, I think that every source is, and it freaks people out when I say, oh yeah, like one of my favorite things I've seen recently on television was Miley Cyrus's New Year's Eve with Dolly Parton. Man, Miley can throw down. She's a pro, man. Whatever setting she was in, and I know I've just heard that because I know somebody's playing with her. She treats her band really, really well. So I think there's something about that spirit of just live musicians, you know, not stuff that we hear like where it's electronic, like just still people doing live music and letting that story happen, you know. So I love the radio. So you know, I have the 70 station I check out, and you know, and then, man, you know, every time I have to listen to Fame by David Bowie when it comes on the radio, you know, or 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, or James Brown or Aretha Franklin. I mean, every time. So, you know, it's just, you know, you want to keep that spirit of your youth in you too by, revisiting this music and going like, wow. I went on a Cars trip the other day, listening to the Cars.
The Cars.
And you know who's favorite, who's Peter Washington, the great contrabassist? His favorite band is the Cars. He loves the Cars. He can sing all those tunes. So I'm making dinner listening to the Cars, and I call Washington. I go, P-Wash, man, check what I'm listening to. It's like, dear, 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 dear. I like the nightlife, babe. It was great. He was like, yeah, man.
And it must be this kind of passion that then translates to, a new generation. That was mentioning that sort of, sparks something in someone who is young and open and wants to, just tries to find their way in the world. And then someone like you comes along, they go like, whoa, Blossom who? Yeah. And maybe they'll check it out. Maybe they like it, maybe not, but who could not like Blossom Dearie? But you mentioned Bowie, and I read recently, sorry, I had to bring that up. I read an interview in Jazz Wise, the British magazine recently, and they said that he once said to you, it doesn't matter what music is called, or something along those lines. Don't care what music is called. And maybe this is also getting us somewhere to that, to answering our question today.
Yeah, I mean, the context and how that came up was that we were getting ready to record Black Star, and David said to me essentially that, don't worry about what people are going to call this. Let's just go and have some fun, and I appreciated that. I mean, I think I grew up, the musical DNA that I grew up with was one that had, was my father playing great American songbook standards, but also like Cal Jader type Latin jazz, and then, tunes like Feel Like Making Love and Mustang Sally and Mercy Mercy that were, in that funk, so that, and all that kind of coexisted. And so I used to play in a reggae band because I'm from Santa Cruz, I was really into surf music and stuff. So all of that is just part of my DNA. But so for me, I've always kind of felt that way. But to have somebody like David Bowie, to articulate that right when we're starting recording, I thought it was just really wonderful. And it was a reflection of his spirit of not being afraid. Not being afraid to look at these different things, genres, types of music that could be influential, like what you were just talking about, Clarice, that woman you've been listening to, that's it's all available to us. The challenge, right, especially for the folks that are here in their generation, is how do you balance all the elements? How do you balance being an open spirit and going for where your heart leads you? Like, at a certain point in my life, it led me to a Madonna tune, and I don't love her singing, et cetera, but that tune really inspired me. But how do you balance that with also really feeling the history and the tradition and all the people who made this an art form that has touched everybody in this room, I think, because we wouldn't be here otherwise. And to dedicate our lives, the hours, what you're doing, what all of us are doing, all the young folks, all the people who are just interested in this. I mean, this is art. It's life. You have to connect with that, and also have your heart be open and to let it lead you where it's going to lead you. And that's a tough balance, man, I think. Every day when you wake up and you're like, what is jazz today? No, but and how do I fit into that? We're talking, my story, like Matt was saying, we're all trying to figure that out, and we wake up in the morning and what am I going to do to give me the tools to tell my story, right? And part of it is following, this thing, but then you're there and you're like, yes, I'm just, for analogy, for me is okay, I'm there and I'm into this and this is why I love it. But, I never really checked out Coleman Hawkins, for example. Because when I was young and somebody in my father's band said, you should listen to him, I was like, that's some old stuff. I'm not into that. I'm into Michael Brecker, right? So I was a kid. I didn't know. I was just a kid. But then, you're like, oh no, wait. I mean, I'm into this just using your example, Chris. I'm into this singer doing this thing, but wait a minute. Oh, right. Coleman Hawkins is a total genius and very avant-garde, actually. And, and that's a tough balance. Your passion, what you love, what you're into, but also doing your due diligence and finding I'm going off on another tangent,
No,
but like that's a real challenge, because we're all further away from the era of like, I'm a good young musician, and now I have a chance to play with Art Blakey, or I have a chance to play with Betty Carter, or I have a chance to play in Buddy Rich's band, or I have a chance to play, with sounds like with Roy Hargrove in Sullivan's Case. Like, those opportunities are so much fewer now, and because of the landscape that we're all navigating, even the Herbies, and they're not touring with a band, so it's like that, how do you feel that and live that when it's more removed? It wasn't as removed when I was 18, and I think, me and Matt were both in Boston at the same time. We had more access to that, and so that's a challenge. It's not insurmountable, but it's a challenge, and we have to work hard to be ourselves, live in the living tradition, carry it forward, and leave our hearts open to where it needs to go to tell our story.
And because you're doing that, one day Sullivan will be Barry Harris, and you will be.
He already is, man. You should see this guy work. It's amazing.
No, but I mean, obviously, for another generation, because, yes, we are removed from those giants, and not, very, very few are among us anymore, but there are those like you who walked among them and who got their inspiration from them, and can sort of, pass it on to a new generation that will then find their own thing and what is in their heart. And I think that's important, and that's the reason you're here. You're mentoring these young people, and passing on not only the passion, but, some of the history and some of those things. And of course, Anat, as I heard, put together this group, so there must have been a lot of thought behind why you chose, this group.
Well,
Don't say no.
No, of course there was thought, but they're just because they're amazing. They each.
And they have the ability not only to play, but
they're not. I know they are extremely communicative and kind people, which for me is very, very important. Supportive, and as a word that Matt Wilson uses a lot, they're enablers. Yeah. And we want in this music, especially when it's in any education and in any moment of giving, you want to welcome the moment and bring people up. So beside the fact that everybody here is an incredible musician with a deep history and research they each did on their own, they are just, I know they're team players and great educators. So it was easy.
And it gets more and more rewarding too to teach. Today we split up and we had 3 groups, and after a couple of hours we all played for each other, and I had this moment where I looked at the students. First of all, the level is incredibly high already, and I saw those smiles on their faces, and I thought, my God, what a great gift. What a thing of beauty that young people still have those kind of feelings and experiences. Especially if you consider all of that stuff that's happening outside of these walls with, fires and wars and all that there's something that stays sacred, and that's something that COVID showed us too, that this cannot be replaced by anything. Live music, live teaching, being together where everybody's part of the experience. And that's comforting. That will never be able to be replaced.
You grabbed the microphone, I think, Clarice. I wanted to put something out to you because I
had
saw
a thought, yeah.
Please.
I would totally agree with you. I was just thinking, yes, the level is amazing of playing and camaraderie too, like among everybody. Like so impressive. And this is not an easy life, you know. The musician's life, that's what I mean. It's not predictable. It might take you to places that you never imagined in all sorts of ways, good or bad, or in the middle, or, you know. So I think that we need, all of us as musicians, of this kind of music, which I'm going to call it art music, you know, because it demands attention, which people don't have anymore so much, which demands deep listening, which we're not like really, there's a lot of noise out there everywhere. It's noisy, right? The world is noisy. There is a lot of information. So how do you exactly balance everything out with the old and the new? You have to be creative, and you have to go out there as ambassadors of this music you love so much, with everything you've got, so that you don't get lost in the path, because it's not a straight path. It's not like I'm going to get a degree, I'm going to get a career. No, it's not. It's going to go all over the place, and you just need to communicate to the best of your ability, your passion, and get people to listen together with you. And this way, this music is going to continue.
Yeah, please, go ahead. Clap anytime you feel it. I saw a video of you inventing this sort of new system of notation, takadi, something, which is also based on South Indian music, the Carnatic, in a way, a little bit has to do with that.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
My question would be how much all of you are trying to make it even easier for people to access this music, or
Exactly.
to kind of, break down these walls that might still be there where people are like, oh, yes, I play an instrument, but not, I can't play jazz.
I think people are afraid of notation. A lot of young people, they saw it and they're like, and they don't want to go there, and they decide not to do it anymore. And music is something you need to feel. You need to feel it in your body, and that's how I learned it. I didn't learn it through the page. I learned it by ear, and later I learned how to, write. And so that's what that is. It's like taking geometrical shapes and putting them into syllables. So a circle is ta, two circles are take, and a triangle, and you go up, and you have the entire South Carnatic music system of, reinvented with geometric symbols, and anybody can make rhythms with that. Actually, it can get pretty complex, but anyone of any age, of any background, and music knowledge can come together and make music together.
Right. I recently heard a jazz musician talk about enthusiastically about the music he creates with his group, and comparing it to a true democracy, saying that because everybody sort of has their say, but they'll arrive at something in the end. They'll just don't, not one will go on off of their trip and all the others will play their stuff, but they'll find a common language, a common ground, which is sort of the idea maybe of democracy. And I told this to an older jazz journalist, and was raving about, that there should be more of this jazz education in schools, and that it's really giving kids an idea of that. And he said, oh, I can't hear this anymore, that people are going like, jazz is this perfect music in this perfect world, and bad people can play jazz. And I was like, but they can't. And he's like, well, what about, and I, of course, now forget the name, Charlie and his whatever. The Nazis had a jazz band that was making propaganda music during the Second World War, making sort of swinging music directed at spreading their propaganda. So I said, well, and it's exception to the rule, which proves nothing. But would you agree that jazz is a nice form of, practical democracy?
Well, I was just. The smart people? Oh, that would be. No, I was thinking about a couple of things. First of all, Matt always likes to talk about we need to be able to lead, but we also need to be able to follow on the bandstand. And I guess in life, like in any kind of relationship, really. So it's not fun to play with somebody who always wants to lead. We all understand that, right? But it's also not fun to play with somebody who's only following. So it has to be a give and take. It has to be at one, and those are really, for me, the most fulfilling moments where it really, the leadership can, and fellowship can change at any moment. And the other thing I wanted to say is, when I thought about, what is jazz, not today, but in general, it's tolerance to me. Yeah. Tolerating another person's opinion, which just becomes rare and rare in our country over there. I know I said our, and I meant the United States. I have 2 passports, by the way, so I can say that. So tolerance.
You're talking about both our countries then.
Yes. Oh, yeah, exactly. And, usually jazz musicians are really good listeners, and I'm not talking about when we're on the bandstand. We actually listen to each other when we're talking. We're not trying to, there are some exceptions where, there is one name and they go like, oh yeah, I have a story about that person too, let me tell you, and they never stop. Jazz musicians usually are really good listeners, and they're very tolerant and open-minded. Now you.
I would add to that to say that it's tolerance and it's conflict resolution. Because here you have, if it's a rhythm section and maybe 2 horn players, you have 5 different opinions of what music should sound like. And sometimes this person doesn't agree with that person. There's a historical fact of like Duke Ellington's orchestra, nobody liking each other. You know what I mean? But, Duke knowing that, still put these people together because he knew what that end product would be. That sometimes that rub is the thing that drives this music forward. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's perfect, but life isn't perfect. And if all art and all music is to reflect life and humanity, like we say, this music is about humanity, then yeah, there'll be some moments where I'm angry and I don't want to play with you for whatever reason. But I got called to do this gig, regardless as to how I feel about you, I got to make this work. I was listening to a lady doing a hip hop interview. She said, I don't have to like you to be able to compliment your shoes. She was like, yeah, I can't stand
that took a while to sink in.
Yeah.
For over like
it's like
1, 2.
It's like, you know what? I don't like you, but those shoes are hot. I feel like sometimes in situations like that, in art and music making, where you have to be like, let me put my personal opinions aside to make this work, to make this argument benefit the both of us. This conflict, and come to a resolve in the end. It's like, well, maybe in order for this to work, I have to play in this manner. In order for this to work, that means that maybe I would have to play less than I want to play. Or, maybe compensate a little bit more. Maybe this person can't do this, so maybe I should play a little bit with the melody with him sometimes, to make sure that he or she can get to, just whatever you can do to make the situation work. And I feel like jazz affords everyone the opportunity and puts everybody on an equal playing field, regardless to all of the differences.
So, it's obvious we're in this safe space here in our little jazz bubble. Maybe we should get some politicians in.
Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to add that everything that these guys mentioned that this music really exposes your personality. So, since you're not told what to play note by note, this is like everything you have. It's like you're bringing everything beside your knowledge, your expertise and your generosity and your acceptance and your tolerance. And so this music is constantly, your love, your respect to the tradition, to the moment, to the creative process. So I think this is, and you can see it by with your body language, so with the sound that people produce, with the exploration, with the. So this is it's an, so maybe it's not to talk about democracy, but it definitely, it brings a dialogue and a discussion. It opens up to possibilities, and sometimes it works and sometimes it fails.
Now, the dialogue is also something, Donnie at the very beginning said something about participation and it being that, and obviously the audience also plays a part. And because you've been around a little while, and we were talking about, not enough patience and people not listening. One of the things that we all notice when we see a rock group playing, and there's a shot from a live set that's a little more further back, you don't see heads anymore, you see phones, which might not be a jazz phenomenon yet, but may happen. But have you seen or experienced a change in audience? Mr. Fortner, if you may.
Well, I mean, in some ways, for us, I guess for most jazz musicians, at least a lot of my shows are kind of filled with a lot of musicians. And while that's cool, sometimes it's also very much like, well, what am I not doing? I'm always questioning who I see. And it's like, okay, I see a lot of piano players, or I see. Yeah, so I'm like, okay, well, that's a level of respect there and camaraderie that's there, and I appreciate it. But it's also like, why can't my mom show up to this thing? You know what I mean? It's like, sometimes I want to see some people who don't know anything about this music and just want to get up and dance, because essentially this is a dance music. So it's like, well, I'm playing and we're swinging, and I look in the audience and, and whether it's an attention span or whether people can't dance or they're afraid to it because of protocol or whatever, I tend to think a lot about those things and just the overall demographic of jazz audiences either being students that study the music or people maybe in their 50s, 60s or above. And there's no one in the middle. There's not a whole lot of women coming. There's not a whole lot of women playing this music. There's not a demographic of, the queer community, the transgender community. There's not a whole lot of that in this music. And if this is an inclusive environment, there should be more. And that maybe it's something to do with what we're playing or what we're not playing, the type of music that we're pulling from, the intent behind what it is that we do. Maybe it might be the look. Maybe it might be, I don't know. I think a lot about these things. I'm curious to hear from you guys also.
I've never changed what my bands do where we're playing. I mean, if it was Ames, Iowa, or Knoxville, Illinois, because I don't want to assume that. I don't like when they go, you might not want to do this stuff because these people might want to hear this. If that's being dishonest, I go out and do whatever, like if I wear, Schoolboy Thug, if I wear we do the whole thing. So I think honesty is really the best policy with whatever we're going to do. And sometimes, like and Albert Eiler said in the documentary, My Name is Albert Eiler, he goes, people may not like my music now, but they will. And so one time I was playing a concert and these two older ladies were leaving. And this one older lady goes, I really enjoyed that. And the second one went, I hated it. So we thought, wow, that's kind of cool, because they probably talked about it in the car, and if they went out for coffee and cake, they discussed it for a while. It's like I just saw the new Wes Anderson movie with my girlfriend and her daughter. My kids couldn't go, and they were like, "Wow, it was pretty bizarre." But boy, we talked about it all night, and we were both saying, "Wow, it made us think." Where we could walk away and go, "Oh yeah, that was cool." So I think sometimes we want to challenge people. We can't be afraid. So I just finished it. It was Saturday. Third year I produced a festival in my backyard. Kind of started because of the COVID thing, but now we just keep it going. And we do these house concerts too. And there's people. They're jazz fans. You know, Sam Newsom was there last year. Played a solo soprano set with the tubes and all this stuff, and people just flipped out. You know, they didn't know. He didn't go in and do it like, well, I better play There'll Never Be Another You. He did what he did, and they loved it. So don't let anybody take that away from you. You know, and whatever you're going to do, you got to follow your, and don't be, you don't want to be selfish about it. So my thing is, the answer is yes, if it's legal. Try it. You know, I mean, you know, I'm not going to give up. You know, and I'm the oldest of this crew. I'll be 59 coming up. But I'm not at this point. I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I like to present things, and at the same time, I like it to be interesting, and I want it to be inclusive. I'm not, you know, but humor and all that stuff is part of what I am. So I'm not going to deny that because I'm thinking, well, what's so and so going to think if I do this? I don't. And you got to surround yourself with people that will follow those visions. That's the most important thing is the tribe. Everybody talks about individual musicians, but I stopped listing individual musicians now. I list their bands for my students. John Coltrane, Jimmy Garrison, McCoy Tyner, Elvin Jones, Ornette Coleman, Don Cherry, Charlie Hayden, Ed Blackwell, or Billy Higgins. And then so they see the band, because that's, you know, Mr. Coltrane had this vision, but it didn't happen without those other folks. Mary Lou Williams' music, Carla Bley's music. You know, so I think you gotta find those folks, and that's why this group is so special. Even if we haven't seen each other, I mean, Mark and I see each other all the time, and not. But you know, and Sullivan and I, you know, I haven't seen Donnie since before the pandemic. We've been friends for 30 or over about 40 years actually. So it's like, you know, you got to find those people. So you might find those people here that you're playing with, that you'll play with for the rest of your life. Yeah. You know, and you'll say, man, we've been playing together for, you know, 30 years or 40 years or 50 years. You know, that's a gift. You know, that's a gift. Hallelujah to that. So, you know, and I also tell my students that we name these names right here. I don't think they're up there going, I don't know what these folks are doing with the music. I think they're going, wow, this is still happening. I think Duke Ellington's up there going like, wow, the music he would have heard today, he'd have been going, man, yeah. You know, he's not up there going, well, I'm not sure. You know, but some people want to paint that. I don't listen. I don't even let those people in my life, you know. Man, move it, you know, and study it, move it, and be yourself, you know, and be honest with what you do. And don't be afraid of your story. Your story is important. Don't let anybody take away your story. Don't let a school take away your story. Don't let a teacher take away your story. Keep your story. Keep your story, you know. All right, I'm done. Sorry.
Matt for president. I'll vote for Matt. Right?
Thank you very much. That was exhausting and exhilarating and wonderful. And I'm thinking maybe we could take some questions, but in a way, I think all questions answered. But if some of you here have a question that is relates to the subject, please go ahead. Yeah.
You want me to do the mic?
No. I'll do that because it'll be you answering.
Shall we still call it jazz today?
Yep. You heard the question?
It's a tough one. That's a tough one to answer because, you know, there's, of course, musicians who've already spoken out saying it shouldn't be called jazz. You know?
Nicholas Payton wants it to be BAM.
Yeah, and I understand that. And I think if I'm understanding the history that I read correctly, that even when it, you know, many years ago, some of the early, this sounds so cliche, I mean, some of the early folks also didn't love the term, you know, so I totally understand all that, and I don't disagree with it, but I, you know, I know that it's, for the industry, it's still this thing of like, it's fiction or is it nonfiction, or is it mythology or is it poetry, and like those things, it feels like it would be hard to change it in a way. I don't know. I guess I don't really have a strong opinion. Like the music that I play in my band, I don't know if that's, I don't know. I mean, we're improvising, but it's not rhythmically jazz-based music, and I don't know what to call it. I call it a hybrid of this and this and this, but at the core, I'm an improviser, and I want to tell my story, and everybody in the band has the freedom to do that, and that is related to jazz to me, and that's related to the vulnerability, the democracy, the communication. That's all, to me, is coming from jazz music. So I still consider myself a jazz musician because that's what the term means to me, but I would be open to it changing. I don't have a strong feeling, but it seems like it would be hard. It's already so complicated, so I don't know. That's
it's kind of out of our hands, right?
It's out of our hands. It's out of our hands.
Because someone's always going to, and that's the joke, like get 6 jazz fans in a room and you'll have 7 different opinions of what jazz is. That's always going to kind of happen. And people do have very strong opinions.
They do. And it's so vast. And that's, to me, Sarah, that question, that's what I think of too. It is so vast. Like, I've been doing this since I was 12, and even before that, listening to my father. There's still a lot of stuff I haven't listened to. It is so vast. And if you're really doing your due diligence and you're really living with it like we were talking about, that takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Another question? That was good.
That was a good question.
Very good. I'll walk over with the mic and.
I have a question about, because you mentioned following your path, following your story, but how did you accomplish to not doubt it or believe in it? Because we're young musicians and we often face our insecurities, and you kind of have to own your story to tell it, right?
I think we really have to remember that none of us has done this alone, and I think without a word of encouragement, and I can't speak for everybody, but I assume that each one of us had somebody that looked at them and said, "Yeah." And that sometimes all you need is one smile and one yeah and one thumbs up to say, okay, I'm going to keep going. So it's not a road that is without doubts. I can assure you. And for everybody that is choosing this path, just get used to this feeling, because it's gonna go with you forever. But some other things are gonna be more and more sure and prominent. So yeah, that's a general answer, but just so you know.
Yeah, that could be a really long discussion, maybe one that's worth having this week. Yeah. Because it's a big part of it. I don't want to, but there's a determination that you have to have, and it's also a really honest appraisal of yourself. And okay, if I'm feeling insecure, I'm feeling anxiety, I'm feeling low self-esteem about what I'm doing, where is that coming from? Is it because I haven't listened enough to Coleman Hawkins, or things like that, so there's this constant thing where you're having to coach yourself every day, and you have mentors in this situation, and maybe you have a private teacher, but it's that day in and day out work as a musician, but also as a human being. And where does the low self-esteem come from? And that's really worth investigating, to try to take care of yourself. Very important.
Yeah, I wanted to say the same thing. That I had to learn to be more gentle with myself, and allow yourself to fail. That's a huge one. Allow yourself to fail, because that takes fear away, and fear is our worst enemy in music or in life in general. That will really set you free. Allow yourself to fail.
And know that everybody is on this path with you. Like, there's no one that's going to be there that listens to pay to listen to you do what it is that you do, that's going to critique you. Everybody's rooting for you. Everybody's behind you. And not only the people that are there, but the people who mentored you, they're there with you. Your family's there with you. You know, every time I play, I almost feel like my grandmother's sitting there listening to me. She's been dead since 2012. She's there. I know she's there, you know, and everything that she taught me is in my music. So if you can find a way to stand on people who you feel are stronger than you, that'll carry you through also.
And living in New York has, there's that, you know, I mean.
Toughen you up.
Yeah. So, that, yeah. No, but you hear, you know, as a bass player, I mean, you hear the world's greatest jazz bassist, if you want to, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like, oh my goodness. And then I try to remind myself that they might do this and this and that and the other thing better than me, but nobody is better at being Martin Wind. As much as they, you know, John Petitucci, as much as he would, because he can do anything.
As much as he tries.
As much as he tries, he would not. Actually, he told me he's been trying. No, but he will never be a better Martin Wind. Yeah. So you gotta believe in that.
And you know, in general, also don't be afraid to reach out and to talk about it, because sometimes, I mean, not all musicians talk about the process, but it's very revealing and comforting to actually share doubts, and you realize, wait, other people maybe also feel insecure or also have doubts, and what do they do? And you know, I think, and this is also could be a gender thing, because you know, we didn't really mention it, but you know, we come from some of you from the younger generation, and you know, there's some age in our life that you know, boys, girls, it's like kind of a strange humans to each other, and very different, but you know, what I always love to play with musicians that feel comfortable to talk about, you know, you play music and it's like, hey, how did it feel? What happened? Let's discuss it. Let's talk about it, and not be afraid, and never, you know, put yourself under anything. It's a discussion. And
it's a big discussion.
And if it's not flowing, then reach for the people that and are enablers.
I was just gonna say, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead. No, I was just gonna say like something that I was hearing and not saying. Well, yeah, gender. It's a thing too. You know, it exists. It's not something we shouldn't talk. We should talk about it. There aren't as many women, or whoever consider themselves to be women, in instrumental music or writing music. Like as a young composer, I first came out with this piece that I wrote from a master's degree. I was 24. I was very young, and it was a violin concerto, and it took me a long time to write. It was hard. I had to do it by hand, and I had it premiered in a festival of new music, and there was a critic there who destroyed me, everything that I did that evening, because I also performed some original music with piano and scat singing and stuff. He was like, who is this girl, and what is she doing here? And like, And I really felt so horrible. And I wanted to give everything up, and I went crying, shaved my head. Anyway, and then I did. I was, I can't get rid of my head, you know, like I wanted to kind of, but it's like, it's funny, it was a piece I wrote in 2004. It's being played now, still. It says something about, you know, the music, right? It wasn't horrible, you know. People are still playing it now. So it takes time sometimes to believe in yourself and make a name for yourself. It's not immediately. For some people, it is like immediately, but for most, it takes time. Yeah. So yeah, as Anat said, reach out, everyone, and with anything that you have, like any questions, any. This is what we're here for, really. It's like we've been there through so much, to so many experiences, and I would love to hear from you if you have anything like that. Because that's important. That's also what we're here for, not just, you know, to talk about the music.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Clarissa Saad, Sullivan Forker, Martin Wind, Anat Cohen, Donnie McCaslin, Matt Wilson. My name is Götz Bühler. Thank you very much. What is jazz today? Who knows? Thank you so much.
That was awesome. I'm glad we recorded that.